who might be disenfranchised to go out and vote. And so this is all about making sure we have folks who are going to be dragging people, strolling, getting folks out as much as they can. And I think with a week like we've had this week, with the deflation we're feeling around the Supreme Court, with the fact that the Senate is not taking up a COVID bill, this is a great time to get folks who don't traditionally vote out to the polls. And so I would say all those volunteers who have already voted, get out and get your neighbors and your friends and anyone who has not voted to vote.
Okay, let me bring in Matthew Dowd as well. Thank you, Yvette. One of the big questions, how much does this debate matter with almost 50 million Americans already voting?
Well, I think that's the untold story. And one thing I think the Presidential Commission is going to have to do of this race, George. Joe Biden has led by 6.7 points, 8 points, 9 points, and now roughly 10 points through the course of this time since March.
This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and what we have here is a 19-inch Zenith color TV that is suffering from attention deficit disorder. And as you can see from the intro of this video, it decided to misbehave whenever I was attempting to watch the last presidential debate, or then again, there might actually not be anything wrong with the TV. I'm told that some of these older Zeniths have a built-in BS disabler, so when they receive content that is total BS, they will automatically go berserk. You know, Zenith, quality goes in before the name goes on. But no, all jokes aside, we've worked on this TV a couple of different times in the past. The first time was due to a leaky video output transistor, and the second time was due to intermittent problems and wonky tuner issues. And as you can see from the intro to this video, it looks like either our AGC or AFT circuit is going wonky and overloading the picture and throwing the sync off, and I'm not so sure that problem didn't exist when I worked on it the second time. Maybe I just thought I had it fixed and didn't have it fixed, and it decided to rear its ugly head again. So we're going to fire it up and turn it on, and I'm sure it will behave wonderfully. Now, there are a couple of things I have in mind that could be problems that I did not look at last time I had this apart. Number one, the plug-in IC sockets. I remember years ago somebody gave me a 19-inch Curtis Mathis color set from the early 80s that was doing something very similar, and actually it was a TV repair friend of mine that gave it to me. Somebody had brought it to him for repair after they had taken it to another shop, and they couldn't fix it, and my friend messed with it, and he couldn't fix it. I don't think he tried too hard, because by that point I don't think the owners really wanted to spend much on it, so they just ended up telling him to dump it. And he gave it to me, and I could tell that it had been soldered on, and I soldered on it like heck, and I at first gave up on it and gave it to a friend of mine for his basement TV. He said, well, I'm not worried about it. When it starts acting up, I'll just slap it and move on. Well, after about a couple of years, he gave it back to me, and I said to myself, I'm determined I'm going to find out what's wrong with his television. And it ended up being an intermittent IC socket. So rather than take the risk of cleaning the sockets and only having a temporary repair, I just pulled all of the ICs out of the sockets, removed the sockets from the board, and hardwired the ICs in place, and the TV worked great. Now, this particular Zenith set uses a 9-181 series signal module, and the earlier versions of that board had the socketed ICs, but the later versions had the ICs soldered directly to the circuit board. Another idea of where I think a problem might be is the tunable coils in the IF and AFT circuitry. I've seen those sometimes have bad solder connections on the printed circuit board and cause this sort of thing. So let's go get a converter box and plug it up and see how it acts. I'm sure some of you old-timers remember these clothespin style connectors that you used for twin lead. Would love to have some more of these. Actually, I have this attached to one of these old school 80s VCR cables that's set up to either be plugged into a 75 ohm coax input or be connected to a 300 ohm twin lead input on the back of a TV. So I have this set up where I can connect it to either type of set. So we have everything connected to the Zenith. Let's turn it on and see what happens.
Antenna next up again.
From a legal perspective, it doesn't really bear on the issues in this case. So tell me about the incident where you got hurt.
Okay, well, Your Honor,
And of course, right now it's looking just fine.
I met a new man, Big G. That's my baby right there.
Oh, man.
Better change it before the Zenith BS meter kicks in.
Christmas being your favorite holiday, I decided to... It's a real thing. Okay, check...
p.m. to 11. That's on the 15th. And what was the next date?
He said, my friend dying to go to church. Had somebody else come do the...
Rogers bought his groceries. It looks like Paul Hicks.
He can pick up in a very fine scent of a glove.
So I'm just going to sit here and watch it and see if it'll start acting up.
Up to 20 times constipation with belly pain.
Right now I'm watching a little 9-inch Toshiba color set from 1976, and even though I don't watch a lot of television and it's been suiting my needs since this one's been on the blink, I'd still like to have a bit bigger TV, and no, I'm not going to go out and buy an $89 flat screen from Walmart. Before I do that, I'll just go to the thrift store and pick up a $10 19-inch TV and be done with it.
It's Big D. Well, that's not your legal name, though, right? That's what you go by. Well, that's what Big D get called. Okay.
I swear some of the judges on these sludge TV court shows look like some rapper reject.
When they go trick-or-treating?
I sampled my kit. Also, Your Honor.
It's starting to mess up.
Yesterday?
Yes.
Yes, only because
Your annual enrollment period to see if you are eligible.
I remember in the late 80s watching some of the judge shows on TV, like People's Court and some of the others. I don't remember the names of them, but those were way more respectable than the crap they're showing now.
I'm not sure you're on the best plan for you. Just call the number on your screen.
Alright, here we are with the back removed and the board partially out. I've removed the shield over the IF section, which is where I think the problem is going to be. So this IC here is your chroma video, this IC here is your sound, this IC back here is your IF, and this IC here is all your sync circuitry. This is our signal module, this is our high voltage and horizontal sweep board, and this is our kickstart board here. That what it does when you first turn the set on, it sends a pulse to the horizontal output stage to, as the name implies, kickstart it, and then once a voltage is produced from the flyback transformer, that powers the horizontal oscillator, and then once the oscillator starts, it takes over and the set will remain in operation. Okay, I've beat around on the circuit board with the butt end of this nut driver like crazy. Only a couple of times did it slightly go crazy when I beat around up here in this IF circuitry. And those kind of intermittents can be particularly hard to diagnose, so I think at this point I'm just going to pull the board out, pull that bottom shield off of the IF section, resolder all the coils, resolder the ground on that shield, and I'm probably going to eliminate that IC socket. Well, now it was starting to mess up again just before I turned the camera on. The picture's a little grainier now, but that could be this interconnect cable, or it could be because I have the shield removed from the IF circuit. Okay, I've pretty much reflowed everything on this in this IF strip. I've removed the integrated circuit and its socket, and in order to remove the socket, I had to remove a couple of jumpers, a couple of shield jumpers, for lack of a better word. One of them went from here to over here, and then the other one went from here to this corner here. And when you work on one of these sets or any TV that has shields and things that are soldered in place, it's very important that you put all of that back when you're done servicing it. Not only does it look sloppy on your part not to do that, but it could also affect the performance of the set when the shields are not in place. I mean, the factory didn't just put them there because they had some excess metal that they didn't know what to do with. They actually had a reason for doing it. So now, here's the IC still mounted in its socket. I'm going to remove it and solder it directly to the circuit board. And then we're going to put everything back together, and I hope this set works. Now, I'm going to just tell you, if this was the old days, back when I could run down to the parts house and get a new 9-181 or a rebuilt 9-181 signal module for about, I don't know, $45, $50. It's been so long, I don't remember what they cost, but I would have just swapped the board out, especially if this was a set that I was repairing for someone. When you get one this intermittent, it's flaky, and you solder the heck out of it and do things to it, and it appears to be working, and you give it back to the set owner, and then they watch it 10 minutes and it starts going wonky again. Yes, I've been there and done that in the past. I've had sets that I think I had them fixed. They'd play beautifully for hours on end for me. I'd give them back to the owner, and then a day later they'd be calling me, "Well, this TV's doing the same thing again." So, and if I put this one back together and it starts acting stupid, I might try to track down another board, because I'm not going to keep messing with this one. And of course, the IC won't just drop down in the hole. There's always got to be one or two pins that are just slightly misaligned and won't let it fall down in the hole. And to be honest with you, if this wasn't a knob-tuned Zenith, it would have probably already hit the EOL pile, because for one thing, this set it may be 36 years old, but it's not really that vintage in terms of vintage televisions. And there's plenty of old CRT sets out there that I can pick up just for my everyday use and not have to bother with this thing. So if this thing pushes me much farther, it's probably going to get scrapped. Okay, I see why I'm not being able to insert the chip. This feed-through capacitor that's not in the way of the socket, but it's in the way of the chip, so I'm going to have to remove it from the board, put the chip in, and then put the capacitor back in as far as I can get it and solder it in place. Alright, what is that, C1207? It kind of fell out and broke, but all it is just a piece of phenolic that's coated on both sides with a conductive coating. So in case I can't salvage that, I'll have to dig up someone with a photo fact on this TV to tell me what C1207 is. But once I got that out of there, the IC drops right in. Well, I got the chip back in, and I got what's left of this capacitor back in as best I can. Don't know if it's going to work. Don't know nothing. I'm going to solder these jumpers back in place, put the shields back on, and we'll go plug it back in the TV and see what happens. Alright, jumpers are in place. This doesn't look the neatest in the world, but it is what it is. Now to put the bottom shield back on, and then we'll clip the top shield back on and then go try this. And if it doesn't work, I'm probably either going to junk the TV or just try to find another board somewhere. Alright, bottom shield's back in place. All we have to do is snap the top on, no soldering required there, and put it back in the set and see what happens. And I'll add that Zenith really did not intend for these sets to be serviced to the component level. These chassis were designed to be 100% serviceable in the customer's home, and that involved finding the module that was bad and swapping it out. Well, even whenever I was a teenager, some of these modules were a bit on the expensive side, and when you bought a broke TV at a church rummage sale for $10 and had to fix it, you couldn't very well spend $50 or $60 or $70 on a replacement module and make anything off of it. Now, sometimes I did that, but a lot of times I tried to fix these down to the component level whenever I could, but the way these boards are packed in there, especially with the 19-inch sets, it's not easy, not impossible, but rather difficult. And in today's world, I doubt there's even anybody that's rebuilding these modules. I know about 20 years ago, PTS still had the 9-181 and 186 boards in their catalog, but I think by that point they were well over $100. You'd think as the demand for them decreased, the prices of what they had in stock would go down, but that's not always the case. I feel like the reason they raised the prices was to actually discourage people from having these older sets fixed, and then once they got tired of looking at them in their inventory, they just sent them to the crusher and let them go. Okay, I let dark catch me, so I had to bring the set down here to the basement to put everything back together. Now I got my flashlight this time. You might remember the last time we switched a couple of plugs on the high voltage module and the set wouldn't power up. It's a wonder it didn't cremate something, because with this particular chassis, they don't need much of an excuse for something to cremate. And on that note, this wasn't my least favorite era of Zenith TVs, but this certainly wasn't my favorite either. I guess as far as the System 3 chassis, the early version with the 9-153 horizontal sweep module and the power transformer was my favorite, and then that was replaced by the one with no power transformer and the infamous 9-160 power supply and sweep module. Those had their share of problems. Once they got all the bugs worked out of them, they were pretty good, but they could be a pain in the butt too. And then that chassis was replaced by this one, and then this chassis was replaced by the one, I can't remember the module numbers, but it had a stand-up high voltage board here, the signal module in the bottom of the set, and then another stand-up power supply regulator board on the left-hand side. That chassis wasn't around long, and then that was replaced by the 9-470 module, and by that point they were moving more towards a single board design. The 9-470 sets, for the 19-inch set with rotary tuning, you had the main module itself and the CRT video output module that plugged onto the neck of the tube, and that was it. And then after that chassis was everything, that was the end of the rotary tune sets, and everything was digitally microprocessor tuned and everything on one big replaceable module. Alright, let me get this all back in here and see if it's going to work. Okay, we have the board back in the set. I hope we have it all connected right, so let's turn it on. Is it going to work or blow up, or what's going to happen? Well, power's up. Well, that didn't last long. So what happened? Don't know, don't care. About ready to throw this hunk of junk in the garbage. Got some arcage going on here. Alright, decided to stay on. I don't know what that was all about. Only thing I can think of is moving it in from outside down here. Maybe there was a little moisture condensation built up under the high voltage cup, and it arced and shut down, but we will remove that high voltage board before we go any further, or before we button this up and make sure it's okay, because this particular series of Zenith TV, from what I'm told, was known for causing fires. This and the older ones with a 9-160 module, and it was due to poor connections on certain parts in the horizontal circuit and where the AC line goes in, and they had this insulating paper here, or fiber board, or whatever you want to call it, that they thought was flame-proof, but it wasn't as flame-proof as they thought it was. Well, certain areas, such as some parts in the horizontal circuit and where the AC line connects on some sets, would arc and crackle, and then the situation would just get worse and worse, and then it would arc enough to where it would catch this insulating material on fire, and then especially in the console sets, that would end up catching the cabinet on fire. And from what I read, there were a couple of houses that burned to the ground because of Zenith TVs, and in one case I think there were lives lost. I've tried to find out some information about that, and there's very little out there about it as to what exactly happened. I'm getting my information from TV technicians who were around back then, but I think that was all pretty much kept hush-hush. Like, box is connected and turned on.
Whirlwind of things that just went wrong. I missed the mega wall.
We're obviously getting a signal. That's good. We have a picture.
I hit my head on the Angry Birds. I didn't hit a single buzzer.
It's a bit on the grainy side, though.
Stage 1 in Vegas last year.
Yeah, our crummy digital signal down here. This is one of the things I hate about digital. In the old days, I could work on a TV just by clipping an alligator clip to the antenna terminal. Now I have to have all this mock up in order to even work on something anymore. I think most of my graininess is because of this cheap cable, but yeah, they just advertised a 42-inch TV for $88 at Walmart, and that crap like that is what put the TV repair industry basically out of business.
And sometimes odors can sneak up on you.
And even though this Zenith is not my favorite era, I'll still take it over the $88 42-inch TV, and I know it won't even be, that cheap Chinese junk won't even be working 36 years from now, and there will be no hope of repairing it. All I know to do with this one is just watch it and see if it messes up, but I'm going to watch it thoroughly before I take it back in the house. Yeah, if this was a cold chassis set, I would probably just bypass the tuner and IF and just put some AV jacks on it and go straight into the video and audio, and because really you don't need the tuner in these sets anymore. As long as you have a converter box with the composite output jacks on them, which most of them have, that's all you really need, and you'd get a better picture anyway. But with this being a hot chassis set, I would have to go through more effort than it's really worth to make this thing to where I could inject a composite signal directly into it. But yeah, this was the entry-level Zenith. The one up after this one had the single-knob Varactor tuner. Then you had one with a digital keypad, non-cable ready tuner with a manual off-on volume switch. Then you had the same thing with a cable ready tuner, and then you had a remote control cable ready version. And then after that you got into the System 3 line that had the cable ready tuning, remote control, and the little light sensor that would adjust the picture brightness based on the room lighting. You know, this set here is not an official System 3 set, but the chassis is basically the same thing as what's used in the System 3 sets, and that's why I basically refer to anything made after the Chromacolor 2 modular sets as System 3. So far we're working okay, but you know that could end at any time. I can tell you when it'll mess up when I put it back together and put it back in the house. Alright, we've been watching it about an hour and no hiccups yet. So I think we're going to turn it off for tonight, and tomorrow I'll check those few things on the high voltage board that I want to check, run this thing some more, put it back together, run it even more, and then hopefully that'll be the end of it. Okay, this is the horizontal sweep and high voltage circuit for the Zenith TV. Now it's important to note, well maybe not so important today, but whenever you replace this, you don't get the entire assembly, heat sink and all. All you get is this actual circuit board with a flyback transformer on it. It's bolted to the heat sink assembly for the horizontal output transistor. And this heat sink assembly also has the kickstart board attached to it. Now if I remember correctly, when you replaced the kickstart board, it came with the heat sink attached to it. I learned my lesson whenever I was a young teenager, and I thought this whole thing was one replaceable unit. Took it down to the parts house to exchange it, and he said, "No, it don't work that way. All you get is the actual 9-186 horizontal sweep module." So we had to dismount everything so I could turn in my high voltage board. But anyway, I really think the hiccup we had with the high voltage arc and shutdown was due to the night air getting to the television from me leaving it outside, and I didn't give it quite enough time to completely dry out before turning it on, and it arced and triggered the overcurrent shutdown circuit. Yeah, these older TVs had such a circuit. The newer Zenith sets from the 90s, their overcurrent shutdown circuit consisted of blowing out the switching regulator for the power supply, rendering the set inoperative, and that was usually caused by a intermittently shorting or arcing picture tube. Those sets were made from roughly about 1991 until about 98, when Zenith closed their tube plant and started using the bonded yoke Thompson RCA and then LG Phillips tubes. Now those tubes held up okay. In fact, I know where a couple of those later Zenith consoles are right now that are still in service. But anyway, what would happen with most of the 1990s era Zenith picture tubes is they would intermittently arc or short and blow out the power supply, and in some cases would blow out the video driver transistors. And sometimes the tubes would go weak prematurely. In fact, I've seen brand new Zenith sets from that era right out of the box. It looked like they had a dying picture tube, and if you rejuvenated them, it would make them look worse than they did before. Oh well, it might look good for a couple of days, but then it would fall off and look worse than it did when you started. I remember in the late 90s, the Zenith dealer, I knew the technician that worked there. They started giving me all of their condemned sets that the customers didn't want back, and I remember them giving me a 97 or 98 Zenith 27-inch set, nice looking TV, and it had no green. And I quickly found that the green driver transistor was leaky. I replaced that, and it had a beautiful picture, and I said to myself, I wonder why they condemned this. This was a simple repair. Well, I sold the set to a friend of mine, and about a week later he called me and he said, "This TV has no green." He said it was working fine, and then the screen flashed real bright, and then it had no green. So I ended up having to give him another television, and come to find out it was an intermittently arcing picture tube that caused that problem. And I ran into the same problem with the power supplies in some of those Zenith sets. I'd fix the power supply, it would work fine, and 2 or 3 days later, the power supply would go out. And I remember the same problem with the power supplies in some of those Zenith sets. I'd fix the power supply, it would work fine, and 2 or 3 days later, the power supply would go out. And I remember the same problem with the power supply in some of those Zenith sets. I'd fix the power supply, it would work fine, and You know, it might be a day, it might be a week, it might be a month later, but before long that tube was going to arc or short again and burn out those components, and then it would come back to bite me in the butt. So it got to the point pretty much when I got any Zenith TV that was made during that time frame, and whenever I saw a bunch of burned up components in the power supply, I didn't even go any further with it. I just condemned it and moved on to the next one. The one common problem on these sets is this little capacitor on the startup board. If it fails, then you'll either get no startup or intermittent startup. And I noticed last night this one was running a little warm to the touch, so we're probably just going to go ahead and replace it. And then I'm going to look at the back side of this high voltage board and check the solder connections on it, because like I said, some versions of this board were known to cause fires because of loose connections on the back side of the board. I think by '84 they had corrected those problems, but I want to make sure the connections would become loose and cause this so-called flame retardant insulator that wasn't so flame retardant to catch on fire, and then that would often spread to the cabinet, which would often spread to the house in which the TV lived in. And I'm pretty sure this is the original high voltage board to the set, because it's dated 10th of April 1984, and that's the month and year that this TV was manufactured, so I don't think this board's ever been replaced. In fact, I doubt this TV has ever been worked on prior to me getting it. Okay, I pulled the high voltage board off of this kickstart board assembly, and I checked this capacitor. It's a 220 microfarad, 105 degree rated capacitor. It actually still checks good, and I was going to replace it anyway, but all I have is 85 degree capacitors, and that really wouldn't be a good idea. Since this one checks good, I'd be better off just leaving it in place. And I touched up some of the soldering on this board. Nothing really stood out as looking bad, but I just went ahead and did it anyway, just as preventative maintenance. Here's the high voltage board, and I've looked over it, and I can't see anything here that really hits me in the face. I might touch up a few things just to be on the safe side and ESR test these capacitors, but that'll be about it. Alright, we're all put back together, ready to go back in the television. And by the way, this device here is the actual horizontal output transistor. If I'm not mistaken, that cross-references to an NTE89. That's the version that has a damper diode built in it. Okay, we have everything back in place, and one thing I forgot to mention that I need to stress is this picture tube can hold a charge even after the set has been turned off, and that charge can amount to up to 30,000 volts or so, and that can really get your attention. So before you go messing around up here, you need to discharge the CRT. And you can do that by clipping a alligator clip lead to a well-insulated screwdriver, and attach your clip lead to this CRT DAG ground up here, and then slip the screwdriver under the anode cup until it makes contact, and if it's got a full charge on it, it will let out quite a snap. But you need to do that 2 or 3 times, and that should bleed it down. Now this particular set turned off overnight, and many of these sets have a built-in bleeder resistor inside the flyback that will take down the charge, and this is such a set, but some sets don't, and the CRT can hold a charge for days or even weeks in some cases. So we have it all back together. Let's fire it up and see if it's going to work or fry. Okay, we have snow. That's a good sign. And we'll now connect the converter box and let it run a little while, and if no problems, we'll put it back together and put it back in service. Alright, there we go. We're working, and we'll just let it run and see what happens. While we're letting the Zenith cook, do a little unboxing. This is something that just came in off of eBay. It already looks better boxed than that record player I got. Of course, it wouldn't take much to look better boxed than that. It looks like whatever this is, they double boxed it and wrapped some foam rubber around it. That's good. And we got a little bubble wrap in the bottom there. Alright, inner box open. We got more foam rubber. Come out of there, and this is what we got. Another Japanese radio. Looks to be in decent shape. What brand is this? A Top Star. Now this one is cracked on the bottom of the cabinet, but that's not due to shipping. It was that way in the listing, and they made note of that. You see, when they make note of something, I'll acknowledge that. I'm not going to try to pull a fast one on somebody, and I can fix that, and won't nobody ever know it was ever broken. And we got a knob falling off here. Okay, whatever. Yeah, another one that somebody cut the cord off of. And printed circuit board chassis. This is a 4-tube set, 12AU6, 12AV6, or T6, whatever, 50C5 and 35W4. So this is a super hit, but it does not have an IF amplifier stage. So this one's going to pretty much be a city radio, and probably strong local stations at that. This one's not going to be a hot performer. Even the little 5-tube versions of this are not very hot, so this one's probably going to be even worse, but we'll devote another video to that later. Okay, the Zenith is still hanging in there. That's good. Hope it stays that way.
Now during Ram Power Days, get 0% financing for 72 months on the 2020 Ram 1500.
Good choice. Head & Shoulders gives you up to 100% damage.
Promo to save 25% off your first year. All Norton 360 with...
Alright, here we are back together. It seems to be doing okay. If you see another video on this set, you'll know it's because it messed up again. And if you don't see another video, then you'll know that it's still working. Now, just to recap, we had a very intermittent problem that looked like it was in the AGC circuit that was affecting the picture, overloading the video, and throwing the sync off. And those problems can be very tricky to diagnose and troubleshoot, because generally they're so flaky that you can't make them act up when you really need them to. So that also lets out using any kind of diagnostic test equipment to find the trouble. You just have to beat around on the circuit board and hope it acts up, and that'll give you a clue to where the problem is. So we resoldered everything on the AGC and IF portion of the circuit board. We removed the IF and AGC IC from its socket and removed the socket and permanently soldered the IC directly to the circuit board, because there's a possibility that socket could have been flaky. And then, just as preventative maintenance, we looked over the high voltage and horizontal sweep board. Didn't really see anything obviously wrong, but I resoldered a few connections just to be on the safe side, and replaced one capacitor where the ESR was just a bit high on it. So, you know, that's all I can do. As long as the TV doesn't mess up, then I can't fix it. And when it does mess up, it's got to mess up for a long enough time for me to get an idea on what's going on here. Now, you know, something that's a hard failure, that's due to a component failure, you can use standard diagnostic test equipment to find that and fix it. But when it's some little intermittent something that could be just about anything, then that makes it much harder to do. And I did touch the grayscale up just a little bit. got it looking a little better. All them specs is because of this crappy cable that I'm using. Alright, well, that'll about do it for now. Okay, here's the little 9-inch Toshiba color set that's been taking the place of the Zenith while it was being repaired. This set was made in 1976. It's solid state, and I picked it up about 10 years ago from a TV repair shop that me and some friends helped clean out. The shop had been in business since the 1930s, and they never threw anything away. And we got what we could get. Some other folks got some things. A whole lot of stuff went to the scrap yard, unfortunately. And now the place is completely gone, as I understand it. And I wished I could have gotten more stuff from there, but you know, you only got so much room to put this stuff. And yeah, these little small screen color portables from the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they're just about extinct now, because when they were no longer needed or stopped working, they were too easy just to throw in a trash can or put out by the side of the road and be done with them. Like I said, I picked this set up, I think, about 10 years ago, and it was in a room full of other sets that were, for whatever reason, didn't get repaired. I don't remember fully what was wrong with this TV. I think the boost filter capacitor was shorted, and I think there was a resistor that was burned open too, and that's basically all that was wrong with it. But it's been sitting up for years, and now it needs a little service again. It's still very watchable and has a nice picture, but you know, the pots need to be cleaned, the vertical size needs to be adjusted, the grayscale needs a little touch up, and looks like there may be some more caps on their way out, but we'll do a video on this one day. And this set indeed has the dreaded instant on feature, where the picture tube filament stays on as long as the set's plugged in, so whenever you pull the power switch you get a picture instantly and not have to wait on it to warm up. And that was a big thing starting in the later years of the vacuum tube era, where they'd keep all of the tube filaments on at about half power, and that way you got pretty much instant operation when you pull the power switch. But the disadvantage to that is all the heat generated in the chassis and all the unnecessary wear and tear placed on the tubes. I can't tell you how many sets I've run across that had instant on where the picture tube was weak. The picture tube in this one is still fine, but I have an idea it's probably been sitting in that storage room at the TV shop since probably the early 1980s, so this set probably didn't have a lot of use, so that's what saved it. When I go in it to service it, I'm probably going to disable the instant on feature if possible. If not, I'll just do it like I've been doing it and plug it into a power strip and just switch off the power strip to kill the whole set. Back in the early to mid 90s, I was finding these kind of sets all the time as a young teenager, both the solid state versions and the hybrid versions. I mean, they were just everywhere, and you know, I took it for granted that they'd always be with us, but it's not so much the case now. And I rarely ever see a set like this anymore. Occasionally I'll run into a 12-inch black and white set at a thrift store, or something like a 13-inch Emerson or Gold Star from the mid to late 80s at the thrift store, maybe once or twice a year, but they're just not out there like they used to be, and I wished I'd have kept more of what I found back then. But back then I wasn't really interested in hanging on to old TVs. My only motivation for fooling with TVs back then was to pick up something that I could fix and sell. And back then, I could pretty much fix and sell any kind of TV that worked that I could get my hands on. Didn't matter if it was black and white, color, tube, or solid state, or a 9-inch or a 25-inch. I could get rid of it. Might not could get as much money for the older ones, but I could still get rid of them. People back then weren't as picky about stuff such as that as they are today, but in today's world, everybody wants the latest and the greatest, and when you can buy a 40-something inch TV that has all the bells and whistles for practically nothing, then nobody's going to really give you anything for a used TV. It's like the guy at the pawn shop told me. He said, I don't even take in TVs that are over 2 years old because I can't sell them. He said, if it's not a large screen smart TV that's under 2 years old, I can just about hang it up. Anything else, I have a hard time even giving them away. So that's where we are with that. But I still pick these up when I can find them for a reasonable price. But you know, it's getting so now, thanks to all these clowns on eBay asking ludicrous prices for these TVs and listing them as gamer's choice or gamer's special or whatever, and people now are seeing that, and you're seeing them pop up on Facebook Marketplace for some ludicrous price. Well, I'm going to just tell you, if somebody wanted to give me $300 for this Toshiba, I'd get real motivated to get it in tip-top shape and let it go. Here's a little set I picked up at the thrift store the other day. It was laid on a pile of junk. And this is one of those thrift stores that if you go in it, it's so disorganized. It looks like 3 other thrift stores converged on that thrift store and threw up all of its contents, and everything's pretty much where you see it, you know. But anyway, this is a 12-inch RCA black and white from about 83 or 84 based on date codes. The model tag is gone. And it works okay. It just needs the usual pot cleaning and tuner cleaning and stuff like that, and do a little cosmetic cleanup on it, and it'll be a nice little set. But whenever I was a young teenager, these are the kind of TVs I got started on. People either give them to me or I'd pick them up at yard sales for, $5 and fix them. Usually didn't much go wrong with them. Power supply diodes from lightning strikes and dirty tuners, dirty pots. The NTE 712 sound IC would sometimes go bad in them. Even ran into some bad picture tubes, and the ones I couldn't rejuvenate, I'd either junk them for parts or take a tube out of another set that wasn't worth repairing and put it in there, and I could get $20, $25, $30 for these kind of TVs, but then it got so nobody wanted them anymore, and I quit fooling with them. 13-inch Gold Star color set from 1988. Picked that up at the Starvation Army a few weeks back for $10. So yeah, you've seen the last 2 TVs that I picked up at thrift stores during the past year. That's just how rare they are, and this set plays, but it needs the usual grayscale setup and pots cleaning and all that good stuff, but we'll get to it one day. Alright, here's the Zenith. We're ready to go put it back on the cart.
How does he use the condoms to fix the damaged bags?
And hopefully, I want to know that myself. And hopefully we'll have no more trouble with it.